past couple of weeks, we've been having a conversation around politics. And not because we like feeling uncomfortable, and not because we don't think there's enough talk about politics on TV or social media or in the office break room. The reason is because we live in a politically charged culture. And because we can't hide in a bubble, live off the grid, or completely escape the political tensions surrounding us, we can instead begin to live more intentionally in how we process, view, and respond to that culture. And this week, we're going to get practical. Yes, it's important to see the people behind the politics. And yes, it's important to reevaluate our assumptions and even misconceptions about who Jesus is and what he values. But let's get real. Here is what we're all wondering. How do we win the political argument? Like, if we're going to intentionally seek out and spend time with people who think differently than us, shouldn't we learn how to win them over to our side? Because this is the heart of the issue, isn't it? It's what we really want. Like, we know we're right. We have a better understanding of the issues, we're more open-minded, and honestly, we have the moral high ground. So what's the ultimate goal when you disagree with someone about politics or issues? To win the other side to your point of view. We see this play out all over the place. Like, maybe you have a friend on Facebook who can't seem to let a day go by without posting political news stories, all while adding their own commentary. You know, the kind of commentary that insinuates this information is here to open your eyes to the truth. You're welcome, right? Or there's that person at work who's continually emailing news stories to her coworkers, all with the intention of converting people who just don't get it. Or even better, there's a member of your family who loves to loudly, but lovingly of course, point out how your political ideas and positions are just plain wrong. Like, these conversations are what make Thanksgiving that much more fun. Or maybe the division exists right under your own roof. Like, maybe you and your spouse are in different political parties, which makes elections even more tense. And things would be so much better if they could just begin to see things the right way. Now, no matter the situation, no matter the method, no matter it's in person or online, the goal is always the same. We want to persuade people to think like we do. Like, we want them to finally see our point and think, wow, you were so convincing, and I was so stupid before. I can't believe I didn't see it this way. Thank you so much for taking the time to open my mind. I'll be forever grateful. Then the tensions we feel over politics, they would just go away. If everyone just saw the issues the way that we did, there wouldn't be a problem. Now, whether it's our view on politics, relationships, money, or even religion, we want people to hear what we have to say and have an aha moment. And now, you may be thinking, that's not me. I don't force my political opinions on other people. And that may be true in the real world. But think about this for a second. Do you ever have arguments with other people in your head? Like, do you have imaginary conversations where you deliver your opinion so eloquently and convincingly that the other person just has to admit that you're right? Now see, whether we make confrontational statements on Facebook, argue at the dinner table, or privately joust with people in our minds, we're all expressing the same desire, the need to show other people that we are right. But here's the big question. How is that working out for us? Like, what's the usual result of these types of arguments? My guess is we'd all have the same answer. These tactics, they aren't winning any hearts or minds or relationships. In fact, heated arguments rarely result in any winners at all. So instead of fighting to win an argument, maybe we can start fighting to win something else entirely. And today, we're looking at a letter the Apostle Paul wrote to a church in Colossae. As with any historical document, when we read these letters, it's important to frame their contents within the context of their culture at the time. And for this passage, context is particularly helpful for understanding Paul's message. Because we live in such a divisive culture where emotions run high, it's tempting to think that things have never been this bad. That what we're experiencing in this time is profoundly unique to us in our time. But in the first century, life was no picnic, especially for the early Christians. Rome, who was the dominant power at the time, did not look kindly on any religious group that questioned Rome's power or its leaders. But that's exactly what the followers of Jesus were doing. So the empire became an enemy to early Christians. And then there was Judaism, the religion that birthed Christianity. The Jewish leaders saw the followers of Jesus as a threat to their religion because Christians viewed Jesus as God, which the Jews considered blasphemous. But the problems, they didn't stop there. It didn't take long before tensions arose within Christianity itself. See, the early church was beginning to spread the message of Jesus to the people outside of Jerusalem, and they'd begun sharing the gospel with Gentiles or non-Jewish people. And then, worst of all, they weren't requiring those Gentile Christians to follow Jewish practices. And this was no small issue because up until this point, most believers had converted from Judaism. And once the message moved beyond the Jewish population, and once it became obvious that a Jewish foundation wasn't a requirement for Christianity, the Gentile believers were seen as different than the Jewish believers. Now, needless to say, tension was everywhere, and the stakes were higher than people being rude to each other on social media. This kind of tension could mean life or death. So it was in the middle of this firestorm that Paul writes this to the Colossians. Live wisely among those who are not believers and make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be gracious and attractive so that you will have the right response for everyone. Now, did you catch what Paul said about how to win an argument? Because if anyone could share some pointers on how to win in heated times, it was Paul. Except he didn't. He didn't tell us anything about how to win. But he does tell us something that may be even better. He tells us how to behave. He tells us how to talk and how to preserve our relationships with those we disagree. Paul doesn't tell us how to win an argument. He tells us how to win a person. And winning a person has nothing to do with changing a mind. Instead, winning a person has everything to do with how we choose to engage. See, he starts by saying we need to live wisely. Another way to read that word is to walk wisely, or to be preoccupied with wisdom. Paul isn't equating wisdom with intelligence. This isn't about IQ or how smart we are or how many talking points we know when it comes to the issues. This is about discerning and having clarity in complicated matters. And this is so important because if the point is to win, or if the point is to change someone's mind, then intelligence would be the most important thing. Or making sure you had your arguments in line, that would be the most important thing. But to make wisdom the point, more important than what's being said is what's not said. Wisdom is about talking, but it's also about listening. When our goal is to win an argument, all we have to care about is the intellectual argument. But when preserving a relationship is the point, then we fight for clarity and for understanding the other person instead of trying to change the other person. In other words, when Paul talks about living wisely, he's talking about being clear. And being clear isn't only about how clearly we're understood. It's about how hard we're working to more clearly understand someone else. But that's not all Paul says. The translation we looked at tells us we should let our conversation be gracious and attractive. In other translations, the word attractive is translated as seasoned, meaning made savory and better tasting, like how we might use salt in a dish. Salt isn't the whole dish. Salt isn't even the main attraction of the dish, but it enhances what's already there. And that's what our conversation should offer to people who are different than us. The point isn't the disagreement. The point isn't our differences. The point isn't our conflicts. No, the point is how we choose to treat the disagreement, our differences, and our conflicts. Are we treating these things with a gracious attitude, with kindness? Are we approaching conflict not as an argument to win, but as a place to engage? In fact, the original words Paul uses in these verses suggest moving toward the other person. Meaning, this isn't about a defensive or an aggressive posture we take with someone we're combating. This is about moving in the direction of people who are different than us, not for the purpose of change, but for the purpose of understanding. When we seek to understand, we bring a flavor to the conversation, a seasoning, an attractiveness that would be lost in a heated argument, debate, or a shouting match. Because in every conflict, this should be our ultimate goal. Win the relationship, not the argument. And here's the truth. We aren't responsible for winning anything except relationships. And this is a challenge because these wins can't be measured. Like there's no end game, there's no end point. Instead, winning the relationship is about consistently, continually showing kindness to one another when it's difficult. It's about showing curiosity toward one another when we don't understand. And it's about acknowledging and emphasizing what we have in common instead of what we don't. So, as we continue to move through a charged political climate, we can keep the following few things in mind. 1, stop fighting and start engaging. Like when we see conversations with people with whom we disagree as simply arguments to win, we see every encounter as a battle. But when the goal becomes engagement, we focus less on changing a person and more on learning from a person. 2, move toward listening more than you speak. Like Paul said, we're looking for wisdom in our conversations, and oftentimes wisdom involves a lot more listening and a lot less talking. If we want to gain wisdom, we need to move in the direction of others who are different from us so we can learn from them. Like, don't wait for people to come to you, and don't attack aggressively when someone challenges your ideas. Move in their direction with grace. And 3, remember the big picture. Like a person's sum total is more than their political beliefs. Choose to see people as more than their political party, their position, or their stance. Ultimately, as complicated as the times may be, and as tense and as challenging as they feel, we don't have to let the political climate set the tone for the relationships with the people around us. We can choose to value people over politics. And yes, these can feel like dark times, but we can bring light to the dark by changing how we approach our differences. We can have conversations seasoned with grace. We can show humility when sharing our positions. We can listen more than we speak. And when we do these things, we'll be different than the culture around us. We'll look like people who are safe, kind, and empathetic. And who wouldn't want to be around people like that? We may not be able to change the news or the tone of social media when it comes to politics, but we can change ourselves. We can decide not to be a part of the problem. We can do what we alone can do to fight for relationships with people around us who may not see things as we do. We can stop fighting to win the argument and instead start fighting to win the relationship. And that's a win that's lasting and life-changing.